Hello everyone, here are the answers to 1 through 9 off of yesterday's worksheet, but continue watching as I will go over each one showing you the steps involved. Now number 1 didn't require any work, just going back to the notes to write out a quadratic formula for B, but a quadratic equation in general form for A. So pause the video to check your answers and then resume playing to see the process of how each answer came about. All right, so for 2 through 5, we had to solve by completing the square, CTS. So for number 2, we have 3a squared plus a minus 2 equals 0. Well, just like our one example from yesterday's notes, we have a leading coefficient of 3. We don't want that, so we're going to start by dividing every term up here by 3. So now this is going to give us an a squared plus 1/3 a minus 2/3 equals 0. Now I'm going to move that minus 2/3 to the other side by adding it, so we have a squared plus 1/3 a, leave some space, equals 2/3. Now we have to figure out what we need to complete the square, so we're going to take half of the 1/3, which will give us 1/6, and then we're going to square that. So we're going to get 1/36, and that's what we're going to add to each side, 1/36. So now we can factor the left side. This is going to factor into a quantity squared. What is going to go inside? An a. Now again, when everything's positive, we're going to put a plus sign here. And then the number we put in is the square root of the number we just added. So we're going to put in the 1/6, or it's half of the fraction in this case, which is also 1/6. Next, we need to get common denominators on the right side. So again, 3 goes into 36. So my LCD is 36. The 1's going to stay the same. But 3 got multiplied by 12, so does 2, so we get a 24. So now I have the quantity of a plus 1/6 squared. I can add these two fractions together. We get 25 over 36. Now I want to take the square root of both sides. So taking the square root of the left side just leaves me with a plus 1/6. And then I need the plus or minus, and then I'm going to take the square root of the numerator and denominator individually. Now what's nice about those two numbers is they're both perfect squares. So now I get a plus 1/6 is going to equal plus or minus 5/6. Now I'll subtract 1/6 from both sides. So negative 1/6 plus or minus 5/6. So now at this point I want to separate these because there's no more square roots, so I can continue to simplify. So first a is going to equal negative 1/6 plus 5/6, which gives us 4/6 or 2/3. The other one, a is going to equal negative 1/6 minus 5/6, which gives us negative 6/6 or negative 1. So our two answers, negative 1 and then 2/3. Let's take a look at number 3. 3 is nice because our leading coefficient is 1. We have x squared plus 6x plus 15 equals 0. We'll move the 15 to the other side, leave some space after the 6x. No fractions involved in this one. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9, so that's what we're going to add to each side. Then I'll factor our perfect square trinomial. Again, everything's positive, and then the square root of 9 is 3, and then we'll get a negative 6 over here. We'll take the square root of both sides. We'll get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 6. We'll subtract the 3, so we get a negative 3 plus or minus. Now this negative needs to come out, so we get plus or minus I radical 6, and that's our answer. Now for number 4, our leading coefficient is a fraction. So I need to get rid of that. I want that to be 1. So to get rid of that, I'm really like dividing by 2 already, so I want to multiply everything by 2. I want to double everything in this equation. So now I'm going to get an x squared minus an 8x plus 16 equals 0. Well, what's nice about this is, yeah, we can move the 16 over. Let's go ahead and do that. But what are we going to add to both sides? Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So guess where we're at right now? We're right back here because we still get a 0 over here. So what that tells us is this was already a perfect square trinomial. So now I'm going to factor that into an x minus 4 squared. That's going to equal 0. Take the square root of each side, so I get x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 0 is just 0. So now x is just going to equal 4. So this is a case, if I were to graph this, right here at x equals 4, my parabola would just sit, touch and turn. I only have one real 0 here. Okay, number 5, we have to divide first by 2. Everything up here gets divided by 2. Now we have a leading coefficient of 1. Fortunately, we have a fraction. We'll get a minus 3 equals 0. We'll add 3 to both sides, leave a little bit of space after the 3 halves x. All right, so off to the side, we need to take half of 3 halves, which gives us 3/4. Now we're going to square that, which gives us 9/16. So we're going to add 9/16 to both sides. Now we're going to factor the left side into an x. We'll have a plus here, and then the square root of 9/16. There's that 3/4. Now over here, we need a common denominator of 16. The 9's going to stay the same. But if we look at this as a 3 over 1, 1 gets multiplied by 16, so 3 times 16 is 48. So we get x plus 3/4 squared. This will give us 57/16. Now we'll take the square root of both sides, so this will leave us with x plus 3/4 equals plus or minus radical 57 over radical 16. We'll subtract 3/4. Now radical 57 we can't do anything with, but the square root of 16 is 4. Now we could leave it like this, or if you notice the answer I had was negative 3 plus or minus radical 57 all over 4. It's the same thing. All right, now for 6 through 9, we could use the quadratic formula. A little bit nicer. We just have to make sure in this case we're good because everything was already set equal to 0. So here, A is negative 3, B is positive 4 right here, and C is this negative 4. So x is going to equal the opposite of b, so a negative 4, plus or minus square root, b squared is 16, minus 4, and then a times c will give us a positive 12, all over 2 times a, so we get a negative 6. So now we have negative 4 plus or minus. This becomes a 16 minus 48 all over negative 6. This will give us a negative 32 all over negative 6. So we know radical 32 could become 16 times 2. So we're going to get a 4 radical 2, but an I is also going to come out. So we get negative 4 plus or minus 4i radical 2 over negative 6. Now we could simplify, and actually because I have 2 negatives leading off here, I'm going to divide everything by a negative 2. So this will actually give us a positive 2. Now because a plus or minus sign is there, that's just going to stay, and then we'll get a 2i radical 2 over 3. Looking at number 7. Again, this is set equal to 0. A is 5, B is a negative 8, C is a positive 2. So using the quadratic formula, x is going to equal the opposite of b, so it's going to become a positive 8, plus or minus b squared. This will always become positive because it's negative 8 times negative 8, minus 4. A times c will give us 10, all over 2 times a, which will give us 10. So now it becomes 8 plus or minus. This becomes 64 minus 40, so we get 24 all over 10. We can simplify radical 24, factors into 4 times 6, so we'll get a 2 radical 6. So 8 plus or minus 2 radical 6 over 10. The 8, the 2, and the 10 can all divide by 2, so we get a 4 plus or minus radical 6 all over 5. All right, now number 8. Hopefully you're looking at this and say it's going to be a lot easier if we solve by factoring, and it will be. But we can still use a quadratic formula on any quadratic equation. So in this case, it's all about writing out what a, b, and c are. A is 1, b is 5, and guess what? C isn't up there, it's really 0. So we have x is equal to the opposite of b negative 5, plus or minus b squared underneath the square root here, 25, minus 4, and then a times c would just give us a 0, over 2 times a, so that's just 2. So now this becomes negative 5 plus or minus, this just gives us square root of 25, because that's 25 minus 0, over 2. So now we get negative 5 plus or minus 5, square root of 25, over 2. So now let's separate these. We get x equals negative 5 minus 5 over 2, which is negative 10 over 2, which is negative 5. Or x equals negative 5 plus 5 over 2, which is 0 over 2, or 0. So our two solutions are, it doesn't matter what order we put this in, 0 or negative 5. All right, and then with number 9, we have 3x squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Here a is 3, b is negative 4, c is negative 1. So the quadratic formula now becomes opposite of b, so it's going to become a positive 4 plus or minus square root. B squared will give us a positive 16, negative 4 times negative 4, minus 4. A times c will give us a negative 3 over 2a, which is 6. So here we're going to get a 16 plus 12 over 6. We get 4 plus or minus. We'll get a 28 underneath the square root. Now radical 28 can factor into 4 times 7. So we get a 2 radical 7 here. So now this becomes 4 plus or minus 2 radical 7 over 6. And we can simplify the 4, the 2, and the 6. Divide everything by 2, so we'll get a 2 plus or minus radical 7 over 3. All right, so we're going to do 2 more problems off of the worksheet. So remember, now you're using any method of your choice. You could go back to factoring, you can go back to inverse operations. You choose, but not every method is going to work. So let's do number 10 together. Factoring is usually the first choice. Sometimes it's the quickest. So in order to try that, we're going to add 3 to both sides. No GCF. So we'll try 2 sets of parentheses. You guys give that a try. See if it'll factor. And hopefully you're getting x and a 3, x and a 1, and everything's positive. So that looks good. So we set each factor equal to 0. And these are our 2 answers. Now, based on how it was set up already, if we left a little bit of space, completing the square is not going to be that terrible either. We would simply add a 4. Half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4. We're going to add 4 to both sides. So now I can factor this as to x plus 2 squared equals 1. Take the square root of both sides, so x plus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 1 is 1. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus 1. If I separate these, I get a negative 2 plus 1, which is negative 1, or negative 2 minus 1, which is negative 3. So again, we could have used the quadratic formula as well. It just may have been a few more steps. We could see factoring is the quickest. Let's take a look at number 15. This one looks a little different. Right now, that doesn't look quadratic, but it is. Why? Because we want to distribute the 4x. When we do that, we'll get a 4x squared plus 8x equals 32. So let's see, again, if this will factor. Let's bring the 32 over. If we try to factor, these are rather large numbers. There is a GCF of what? 4. So let's factor that out. We'll have an x squared plus 2x minus 8. Still keep the 4 for right now. Make 2 sets of parentheses. Looks like we can have an x and a 4 and an x and a 2. See if that'll work. Figure out the signs. Should be a plus and a minus. Now that 4 we don't need, there's no variable with it, so we said x plus 4 equal to 0, x minus 2 equal to 0. So x equals negative 4 or x equals 2. We could have also done completing the square from this line right here. We could divide everything by 4, right? So when we do that, we'll get an x squared plus 2x equals an 8 on this side. So half of 2, we're going to add what to each side? Half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So now the left side will factor into an x plus 1 squared, and we get a 9. Take the square root of both sides, so we get x plus 1 equals plus or minus square root of 9 is 3. So now we get x equals negative 1 plus or minus 3. Separate these. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. And negative 1 plus 3 is our 2. So completing the square, we didn't have to worry about that GCF. We actually divided by it first, and it made it very nice. Could we have done that at the beginning over here to try to factor? Yes, we could have divided everything by 4, not a 4x, but just by a 4. So that would have worked. All right, so your assignment is to finish yesterday's worksheet. So the quadratic equations review. Keep in mind we just did 10 and 15, so that means you're doing 11 through 14. 16 and 17, but I want you guys to try number 18. Use Desmos or a graphing calculator. So give that a try. As always, take care. Let me know if you have any questions.